Dave Beattie of Hamilton Campaigns, thanks.
Thank you.
Let's go through a few things. Looking back at this last election cycle, what was the biggest surprise to you in Florida?
You know, I think it was actually surprising that the Republican primary had almost no impact on the general election. You know, there was a debate about what happened in the Democratic primary and where were Jewish voters going to go. But the Republican primary was quickly over. And I think that Republican voters got less excited about the race as it got closer to Election Day. So you had less excitement, in part because I think there was less controversy from the Republican primary, and you saw a little bit lower Republican turnout on Election Day because of that.
Obama had very short coattails in Florida, down ballot. Going forward, heading into the next cycle, is there any reason to think that the energy and the organizational efforts of Obama will pay off for Democrats?
Well, what Obama has done is give some excitement and definition that is in a positive for what Democrats are going to focus on, which is the economy, making sure that people aren't taken advantage of. But it was a campaign about personality. That's what we see in modern politics. It's not surprising that there weren't long coattails because every candidate has to run their own race. And when you look at the state and local races in Florida, there's a lot of gerrymandering, so there's a lot of safe Democratic seats, a lot of safe Republican seats, and just not that many competitive seats at the legislative level. You saw a pretty big impact at the congressional level in Central Florida with Cosmas and Grayson picking up. So it's not that there weren't coattails, it's that the state seats are so much safer for both Democrats and Republicans that it just had less impact in state races.
I'll spare you from assessing the Democratic field of Senate contenders because you may have a client there. But we're looking at a Republican field that very well, at least we're talking about Marco Rubio, Vern Buchanan, Connie Mack. How do you see that field, pluses and minuses?
Well, I think overall, there is no, either on the Democratic or Republican side, there's no statewide candidate. Any candidate that is running on either side of the aisle is going to have to build a statewide organization and statewide name recognition. And while there's a cost to a primary on both sides, because none of them have a statewide base, there's actually a benefit of having a primary that's relatively late and being able to build that organization to be able to really compete statewide. And their primary on both sides, the primary battle is really going to be building the infrastructure to win in November. It is going to be interesting how much money is spent on both sides. And looking at the fundraising on the Democratic and the Republican side is going to be very interesting in terms of assessing where are the two parties in the state after the 2008 election. Which are Democrats or Republicans raising more money? Which side's the money going to? And what kind of organization are they putting into place early?
What's a reasonable estimate for how much it'll take to, how much you have to raise and spend for a viable primary campaign for Senate?
6 to 10 million is six would be a pretty low end. 10 million is pretty realistic, but it would not be unreasonable to spend 12 or 15 if your opponents are spending that much. So if you're running a full statewide campaign, it's different than if you have multiple candidates that are trying to really focus on regions. So anywhere from 6 to 15 million is a realistic range. 15 million would be on the high end and probably difficult for anyone to raise, but self-funders may be able to put money in, such as Vern Buchanan, to put money in to have that amount to really put together a statewide campaign in a primary. And
Charlie Crist, as a Democrat, do you look at him, how do you explain that when Florida could hardly be in any worse shape than it is today, he has such astronomical approval ratings? Well,
I mean, what Crist has done is, one, he's taken issues that aren't just straight party line. He's where the future of politics are and done a lot of what Obama has done, which is say, I don't want to just talk about things in a Democratic or Republican fashion. I'm not going to just appoint hardline party members who agree with me. I'm going to look out to candidates on both sides. I'm going to look for places for common ground, and I'm going to have some key issues that are not typical for my for what people would expect for my party. The being outspoken in having Florida voters votes count was very smart for him. The voting machines and felon rights, not something that you would expect from a Republican, but something that said to a lot of voters, not just Democrats, but a lot of independents, that he is not just straight partisan. And it's really a state where we don't want overly partisan candidates. We want people that are in the middle, that are going to look for solutions, and hopefully move the whole state forward.
Dave Beattie, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I bet that worked.